Well, this week we got invited to see a massive explosion and it was epic. Make sure you stick around to see what 50,000 pounds of explosives can do. And let me tell you, it's amazing. We're also going to learn about seismographs and man-made earthquakes, among all things. And believe it or not, all of this is going to help us understand something weird that Jesus said about the kind of people who are going to have an amazing inheritance. Let's check it out.
Maybe you try it. Maybe you try it. Maybe you try it. Maybe you try it. Maybe you
Well, welcome to the Journey Church. We're an online church for people everywhere, and everything we do is designed to help you get to know Jesus, learn the Bible, and help motivate you to walk out what you're learning in your everyday life. And before we get into the lesson this week, I wanted to give a shout out to some of the awesome people who are watching every week from home or the truck or wherever you're at. And there's also some great groups starting up, meeting together in basically home churches to watch and discuss the episodes each week. So here's a quick rundown of some of the cool people that are out there tuning into the Journey Church and calling it home. I wanted to say hello to Corey and Krista and their family up in North Idaho. We got Bruce and Tammy in North Idaho. We got Ron and Toby in Eastern Washington. We've got Will and Ashley also in Idaho. Rob and Jessica and their family down in Southern Idaho. We've got Roland and Dawn all the way up in the frozen tundra of the north. And the sun is blurring my eyes and I can't see. Oh. I still can't see. Let's try that again. We got John and Jessica in Eastern Washington. We got Sean in Idaho. We've got Sherry out in South Carolina. We've got Wendy all the way out in Ontario. We've got Shane and Sarah that are somewhere out in Tennessee traveling in their RV full time. We've got Tracy out in British Columbia, Shaylin in Eastern Washington, and so many more people tuning in all over the United States and Canada. And I just want you to know that we are so proud of you for digging in and growing in your walk and just tuning in and watching every week and taking this stuff seriously. So we appreciate you, and we're so excited that you guys are plugged in and doing this. If you're watching this and you're not connected in a group and you'd like some help getting connected, or you just want to meet, we would love to connect with you. Drop us a comment or just shoot us an email. You'll see it pop up on the screen, and let's get together. In this series, we're taking a fresh look at a chunk of scripture that's known as the Beatitudes. These are from a series of statements where Jesus is explaining to his disciples about the kind of people who are really in his kingdom. And the way he describes these people is kind of confusing. So much so that most people tend to just skip over these statements by Jesus, or maybe they read them, but they don't really understand what they're reading. So far, we've done teachings on the people that Jesus described as poor in spirit and people who mourn. If you missed either one of those or the kickoff to this series, be sure to click the link above. You can also find a link for those different episodes in the description below. Well, this week we're at a huge rock pit. I don't know if you'll notice or not, but it's also really loud with a giant rock crusher. And you look around at the terrain and all this heavy equipment, you might be wondering what in the world any of this has to do with helping you understand something that Jesus said. Here's the thing. Everything here is big and strong. It's huge. There are these powerful loaders down there. There's giant dump trucks. There's this loud smashing, crushing machine down there that's strong enough to take these incredibly hard basalt rocks and pulverize them into gravel. And when you look down there, if you happen to see a person walking around in that pit, they look so small and vulnerable in comparison to everything else. This is the kind of place that you need a healthy fear of all this huge, dangerous equipment. And all of this is a great metaphor for the way that the world worked in Jesus's time. The powerful and the strong run the show. The more powerful they are, the more they're feared. The more they're feared, the more they oppress the weak and vulnerable. The wealthy and the powerful were the ones that owned the lands and the businesses and the trade routes. And when one of these powerful people dies, they pass on their inheritance to stay in their family. And what happens when people inherit a great deal of wealth or power that they didn't work for or earn on their own? Well, probably most people know that's rarely a good thing. When wealth and power come to a person whose character hasn't been developed, it tends to bring out the worst in them. And all of this just perpetuated the gap between the strong and the powerful and the poor and the powerless. Not one time would a poor tenant farmer or a shopkeeper or a shepherd have ever gotten their hopes up and dreamed that one day the rich land baron would pass away and they would somehow inherit his lands. It would have been ridiculous to think something like that, much less ever hope for it. Well, this is the context that Jesus entered into. This is the world that his audience lived in. And it's why his words about who would inherit the earth were so shocking. Jesus taught his disciples, "Blessed are the meek, for they will inherit the earth." Well, remember, we've talked about this in previous episodes. Blessed is a word that means a deep sense of happiness and joy that's beyond your circumstances. And when we think of what Jesus says here, it certainly applies. Deeply happy and content are the meek, for they will inherit the earth. Well, that part makes sense. There's some confusion around the statement by Jesus where he's talking about who the blessed are, the meek. Like, who in the world are meek people, and what is meek? We live in a world where the powerful and the wealthy just pass on their inheritance to others like them. But Jesus is saying things are different in the kingdom. Blessed are the meek because they're the ones that are going to inherit the earth. So who are the meek? Well, in our culture, meek is just not a word that we use really at all in our everyday language. I bet most of you watching this have never used the word meek in a sentence, unless maybe you're talking about this Bible passage. And when a word isn't part of our normal vocabulary, it's no surprise that we don't have a good grip on what it actually means. So people tend to just make up stuff and they take a guess at it. And more often than not, when people think about meek, they usually guess that it's essentially the same thing as weak. And so they conjure up a picture in their minds of a meek person, and it's usually the kind of person that gets picked on or bullied, or someone that you might describe as a doormat, right? The kind of person that just gets walked on. So at first glance, people might read what Jesus says about the meek inheriting the earth and think, wait a minute, what? So first the powerful people get it, and they get, all the inheritance, and then Jesus comes along and now he wants to give all the inheritance to the wimps and the cowards and the pushovers. I mean, how's that fair? By the way, if you thought something like that, it's okay. Lots of people think that that's what it meant, but it's not. And I'm glad that you're here, stretching and thinking and learning. Well, meek is not weak. Actually, it's far from it. It's better to think of meek as strength and courage while being humble and relying on God. Meekness has to do with the way that you're willing to share and sacrifice on behalf of others. When we look in the Bible, Moses may have been one of the meekest men to ever live. He led the Israelites out of Egypt and lived his life in service to them and submitted to God. His life is full of great examples of what it looks like to be a meek person, always willing to turn to God for help, direction, for training, or simply just for the joy of spending time with Him. Unfortunately, many people who claim to be Christians are not meek. They're way more concerned with doing things their way, trusting their own instincts, seeking to be right, trying to justify their choices and their own way of living. So when Jesus teaches his disciples that the meek shall inherit the earth, it's a really big deal. He's saying, listen, the people who are going to gain the ultimate inheritance are not the powerful, the mean, the oppressors all around you. What they gain is temporary. He's telling them there's an inheritance far greater than this little field over here or that section of land over there. For the meek will inherit the earth. It's a way of saying that what I have in store for them is bigger and better than anything that they could ever dream of. I mean, that's a pretty cool thing to think about. So the people who submit to the Father, the ones who are brave enough to trust God and have the courage to do what He tells them, the ones who are humble before God and serve the least of these around you, these are the meek. And they may not come from some well-known family name, and they may have little or no wealth here and now. But Jesus tells these people that there's going to be a day that they're going to receive a great inheritance. And He's given them this promise to trust Him that it's on the way. Which brings us back to why we're here in this rock pit for this episode, to give you a new way to gauge meekness, a real life example to help really cement this idea in your minds that meekness is not weak. Meekness is power and courage and strength, but it's submitted to God, like power under control, which is exactly what it takes to turn these solid rock walls into smaller chunks that can be turned into something useful. It takes power under control. Many of you have heard of a seismograph. It's an instrument that's used to measure earthquakes. So I want to introduce you to my friend Bruce. He's going to tell you a little bit more about what a seismograph is, and then we'll circle back and talk about how that relates to what we're doing here.
Well, what we're looking at here is a seismograph. Every time we do blasting, we create a small earthquake. If you can imagine 40,000 pounds of powder going off in the ground, it's going to shake. And with all these beautiful houses that we've got popping up everywhere, people don't like their fine china getting shook and the pictures coming off the wall. So we record each shot now, and put that in our shot reports so that we've got a record of how much we've shook a guy's property. We're allowed a certain amount by law, and the only way we can do it is to have a certified seismograph. It's kind of an interesting machine. It has the sensor here that we stick in the ground. These go in the ground, and this is what registers the shaking, and it's triggered through a couple of different ways. It's triggered by both the vibration and it also has a trigger that we hook onto it that deals with decibels. Anything above 130 decibels will trigger it as well. Beyond that, I can't tell you a whole lot. It's above my pay grade.
blasting team is to use enough explosives to blow the rock up and send it out into the pit, and not overdo it so that the rocks go flying too high or too far and cause damage to people or property nearby. So their goal is power under control. And that seismograph measures their success or failure, right? Did they calculate it correctly? Did they get the right results and stay within the range that they're allowed to disturb the earth? Imagine if we all had our own seismographs to help us get a reading on how we were doing using our power. You go through a situation at work or with your kids or with your spouse, and then after it's all finished and the dust settles, you get to pull out your seismograph and see how you did. Does it read meek? You had power, but it was under control and submitted to God? Or does it read like you just shook the whole house and people around you were afraid or coward? I wonder if you could all look back over all the readings in your graph for the last month or two, what would the reports look like?
Maybe you try it. Maybe you.
Well, speaking of results, let's take a peek at how our explosives team did. They set off just about 100 holes filled up with nearly 50,000 pounds of explosives. That is no small task. By the way, most people don't have any reference for what 50,000 pounds actually is. To give you an idea, it's over 16 Toyota Priuses. And if you're familiar with the little Black Cat firecrackers that you get on the 4th of July, it would take nearly 300 million firecrackers to get 50,000 pounds. The moral of the story, what you're about to see is a lot of explosives going off. Enjoy. Well, these guys are professionals, and it's no surprise that they stayed well within their range. By the way, they're allowed to go up to about a 2.0 earthquake. So like within their parameters, they can essentially make an earthquake that registers 2.0 on the Richter scale. Pretty amazing. So here's the deal. This week, the challenge is to really examine your imaginary seismographs. How are you using your power? One good way to learn how your power is going is to ask those around you. Are you coming off too strong? Do they see that you're submitted to God? Are you serving them and using your power or position to help others who are less fortunate? With that in mind, I want to leave you with some great shots of a gigantic Tonka truck that I found in the back of this pit when I was out exploring, and one more look at the big boom. Thanks for tuning in. I'm going to see you next week with another Beatitude from wherever we are out there.